Thank you for coming on, and we're excited to hear your presentation.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I would like to thank REL for having me, as well as Mrs. Betty Underwood for recommending me to this organization. My name is Kyron Harvell. I'm here on behalf of the Lansing School District in Lansing, Michigan. So a little of my story. I've worked in the district for the last 16 years in the capacity as a principal at the elementary, middle, and high school level, as well as a guidance counselor. Interestingly enough, as I thought about it, over those 16 years, I've been in probably 7 different buildings, and I've only had 9 Black teachers total in 16 years. It made me think about my experience in college, where I didn't have any professors that were Black until I got to my graduate school. I ran into my mentor, Dr. Robbie Stewart, who ended up becoming like a second mom to me. So it just kind of made me reflect on the experience of not seeing anyone that looks like you in school. So currently, I'm the director of the STAR grant. This is a school culture and transformation grant from the federal government. It's a 5-year grant. STAR stands for School Transformation Accelerates Results. This is a 5-year grant with an emphasis on providing equitable access to opportunities for all key stakeholders through focusing on culture responsive practices, professional development, social emotional learning, mental health, decreasing office referrals and out-of-school suspensions, and providing multi-tiered system of support. Interestingly enough, that last statement in terms of referrals and suspensions, when we look at the demographics of Lansing School District, 39% of the students are African-American. However, those 39% during 2019-2020 made up 81% of the out-of-school suspensions and 77% of the disciplinary referrals. So to start to ask the question of, is this an issue of staff not having relationships with students? Because when we look at the staff demographic, it does not reflect the student demographic. In Lansing, similar to other areas, I would say the staff demographic is 90% white, majority being females, and clearly here you can see the breakdown of the demographics for the students. My background is in counseling, and all the research supports the notion that rapport is the strongest indicator of successful outcomes between a client and therapist or a teacher and student. So this kind of pushes the issue of how important it is to have relationships. So I've often wondered, are some of the reasons that we see such high discipline referrals and out-of-school suspensions due to there being that disconnect between staff and students? I was very fortunate to be selected for the Aspiring Leaders Program. Mrs. Underwood is director of the REAP program, another federal grant. REAP stands for Rewarding Educator Achievement Performance. I was on the central office track where I had the opportunity to rotate through various departments. One of my major interests, and the department I couldn't wait to get to, was the Human Resource Department. I was very interested in understanding the recruitment efforts as it relates to Black teachers. Nationwide, Black males only make up 2% of the teachers in the nation. I saw Mrs. Unae holding this online, and I was reminded of when we went to a recruiting fair in Atlanta, and I was kind of going around bugging everyone. I thank her for putting up with me, and I was trying to convince people to come to Lansing, and they were saying, it's too cold there, it snows there. I said, well, we'll provide you with a coat, boots, just come to Lansing, come work with us, and I was doing whatever I could. So during this program, my capstone project, I want to look at recruitment efforts. I interviewed teachers, sent surveys in the district, as well as teachers at historically Black college universities, as well as other colleges. So look at recruitment. Why did teachers get into the field? What's their experience been since they've been in the field? And why do they feel Black teachers do not want to come to education? Overwhelmingly, all the responses were pretty much the same. In terms of why teachers got into the field, they felt that need to get back to their community. Similar to me, they grew up not really having any teachers that looked like them. So they wanted to be of benefit to those, be that voice for the voiceless. In terms of their experience, it was really interesting, very sad. Many mentioned that they often didn't feel included or a part of the team. They didn't feel that level of cohesion that staff should feel. They often felt that there weren't many opportunities for upward mobility and advancement. They also indicated that they were often sent to low performing schools on the persistently low achieving list, or they were given the kids who had the most discipline problems or issues related to academics, which of course negatively impacted their evaluation, stress level, et cetera. Also, they had to be, quote unquote, the Black voice whenever something would come up, and they often felt isolated in staff meetings. This was across the board, district-wide, when I talked to other college universities, as well as historically Black college universities. When asked why individuals were not coming into the field, one of the main things came up was the financial aspect in terms of starting salary, all the changes that take place in education, being concerned about going to a quote unquote bad school, not having mentorship, being worried about being that one person that has to be the sole voice for Black students, and also the incentives that are not currently in place at many districts. So those are some of the issues that came up from the findings during my capstone project in the Aspiring Leaders Program. I was happy to become the director of the STAR grant because I'm really big on culturally responsive practices. One of the things we've done and continue to do, which started this summer, was provide a professional development series. We had weekly webinars every Wednesday, and I invited scholars, both locally and nationally, to come in and talk about topics, from Dr. Dorinda Carter-Andrews to Dr. Anthony Muhammad. They talked about looking at culture and climate through an equity lens, strategies to work effectively with all populations, code shifting, dealing with your urban students in the age of COVID-19, school to prison pipeline, et cetera. And as a result of these professional development series, staff were able to come together. They started their own book studies. A lot of staff had the opportunity to reflect on their own personal practices. We had professional development sessions on implicit bias. Many staff were able to take a look at themselves and say, wow, I didn't realize that I had this bias. I didn't realize I was doing this. So staff have been really involved in focusing on being more culturally responsive, utilizing planning time to be culturally responsive, and just think about their social practice. We're very fortunate in Lansing School District to have a collaboration with our Human Resources Department and the Office of School Culture and Climate as it relates to our employee wellness program. I just found out we're starting a STEP program to assist individuals getting healthy. There's mental health counseling. We're in collaboration with the organization to provide mental health counseling. Staff can come in and get massages. Staff have mileage clubs. Staff can get other resources that can assist them as far as making sure they're able to deal with the stress and strain of being a teacher, not just during COVID, but just being a teacher and being responsible for the lives of our children. So our employee wellness program is really taking off right now, and I've heard from many staff that they greatly appreciate it. I saw Mrs. Rusher, Doretha Rusher's on the line as well. She and Elizabeth Ballinger are starting a self-care series each week. They're going to have a webinar where they talk with staff about self-care strategies. So again, I think we're doing an excellent job in Lansing regarding our employee wellness program. So lessons learned. In terms of the surveys and interviews, I think the biggest lesson that I learned is we have to be very strategic in terms of how we go about recruiting Black teachers to districts. We need to really look at what their needs are. We need to have an open ear and recognize that as long as people feel isolated and marginalized, they're not going to want to become a part of any organization. I believe statistically, over half the students in public schools are students of color. However, we know, as I mentioned earlier, the staff demographic does not reflect this when you're looking at students. It's hard to be something that you can't see. It's very important that our students are able to see people that look like them. That's a very big deal. Safe environments for equity discussions. We've had a lot of staff that have said, they wish they could have these conversations on a more frequent basis. So now in Lansing School District, I was happy to see that our central office implemented what's called A Day. It's an asynchronous learning day where staff have the opportunity to work on social emotional learning. They can have these discussions related to equity, related to how we go about providing structural practices and just support for staff and students. In terms of next steps, I would encourage districts to look at conducting a comprehensive needs assessment to really talk with staff of color to find out what's going on, what's been their experience, why they get into the field, and why do they feel others are not coming. If we don't talk directly to the people, we can make all the assumptions that we want, but the answer lies with those that are engaged in the work. Recruitment and retention incentives. I have a friend who recently went to Los Angeles and the LA Unified Schools. Anyone that comes there to teach, they're offering them free housing. Looking at things such as providing housing, even providing transportation, tuition reimbursement, maybe a stipend for teaching in some of the persistently low achieving or priority schools may be a benefit to bring in more Black teachers. Grow your own programs, such as the Aspiring Leaders Program, which I had the pleasure in taking in. As I mentioned during the interviews and surveys, many staff indicated that they didn't feel there was any room for upper mobility and they were just kind of stuck. We will start to see more people that want to come in when they recognize there's opportunities to grow and develop and to not just stay in one place. And lastly, equity audits, which our school district recently sent out a request for proposals. We're going to have a firm come in and conduct an equity audit to look at how funding is allocated, to look at staffing, to look at hiring processes, and to get just to gauge teachers to see how they feel things are going in the Lansing School District.
Thanks so much, Kyron. That was a really great overview of your work and your program. We have one quick question for you from the panelists. They were wondering how you set up your professional development regarding culture responsiveness, and if you feel like there was any PD fatigue as a result that may have let less people want to participate.
So the way I set up my professional development, I reached out to quite a few staff to conduct a survey to see what areas of need they would like to hear professional development or have some training on. After getting those topics together, I started to reach out to friends that I know that are well respected, both locally and nationally, to see if they would be willing to provide professional development. They gladly welcomed the opportunity. I didn't see much fatigue. We probably averaged during the summer close to 200 participants per session, which I think is good considering that teachers are technically off work. Well, teachers are always working, but they're not contractually scheduled to work during the summer. We averaged about 200 participants. It was every Wednesday from June until September from 1 to 2:30. So I don't feel that there was any fatigue. The presentation was very engaging. The presenters provided their PowerPoint. They provided book recommendations. When I was on there, I would always give a book away. I would ask the presenter to recommend a book, and the next staff to comment. I would say, you won the raffle, I would give them a book. So I think it was engaging, and I didn't experience any fatigue based on the surveys that I received as it relates to our professional development.
That's great. It sounds super engaging, for sure.
I think it was. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, well, thank you so much. We're gonna invite Sharif to come on next, and Kyron will be back later for our panel discussion. Sharif, looking forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate REL Midwest. Again, my name is Sharif El-Mekki. I recently retired from working directly in the school. I was 26 years in 3 different schools, the last 2 being turnaround schools. I graduated high school in a public school. Many of you may have heard of Overbrook High School. Will Smith, Will Chamberlain, and people like that attended there in West Philly. Ended up getting a scholarship, but I went to college with the idea of being a lawyer. And it wasn't until after I graduated from college where someone spoke to me about becoming a teacher. And while I grew up in an activist family and an activist community, I did not necessarily look at education as a part of activism. Not that I crossed it off my list, it just never made it to my list. But, you know, a teacher, a Black man, Dr. Martin Ryder, was leading an effort in Philadelphia between a nonprofit called Concerned Black Men and HBCU, Cheyney University, as well as the School District of Philadelphia, to recruit Black men to become teachers. And once he pointed out the connection between racial justice and educational justice, I was eager to jump in and learn as much as possible and be an effective teacher, and ended up being a principal for the last 16 years. While I was a principal, I had an opportunity to do a fellowship at the U.S. Department of Education, and while traveling around the country and speaking and visiting schools, really noticed that there was not a lot of Black men. And I started reflecting on my own career and realized that when I was a teacher, I was the only full-time teacher that identified as a Black man. Fortunately, there were other Black men in the school who had leadership roles and maybe hybrid positions. So there were other Black men teachers, but I was the only one that was doing that full-time. And I realized that I didn't have this isolation or this invisible tax. I wasn't looked at as the disciplinarian for the school or for the grade, but that many of the people that I was meeting, many of the Black men I was meeting around the country, including in Philadelphia, did have that experience. And so launched an organization called the Fellowship Black Male Educators for Social Justice, raised enough money to hire a CEO, and then I went back to being a principal. But I was still just really intrigued of how we could address the issues in a more holistic way, and so started the Center for Black Educator Development, and really looking at four roles. One around policy. How do we advocate for policies that support educational justice? pedagogy that's informed, that's culturally relevant, that centers the experiences of Black teachers. You know, while we hear more people speaking about Black educators, this was a cry way back in the 1880s. You know, people like Carolyn LeCount, who was a Philadelphia educator, and you know, advocated for Black principals and Black teachers in the 1880s. We also provide professional learning, workshop coaching, mentoring for professors in teacher colleges, as well as aspiring educators. And the last P that we have is pathways, where we use the Freedom Schools model to have paid apprentices, teacher apprentices. So as early as freshmen in high school, students are paired with first, second, and third graders. They're taught how to teach some basic components of reading. We work with Dr. Nell Duke out of the University of Michigan, and her research on with her doctoral student, Julia. And high school students, college students are able to work in this intergenerational model, learn how to teach first, second, and third graders, and also how to nurture and support positive racial identity, while they're also getting the same mentoring. So it's kind of the lift as you climb model, where our staff is supporting the high school and college students, who in turn are supporting the first, second, and third graders. So those are our 4 pillars: policy, pedagogy, professional learning, and pipeline. And so we look at our work in professional learning in particular, that everyone, whether it's a school board member, whether it's a professor in a teacher college, whether it's the freshman in high school or a senior in college, that all educators should constantly be thinking about achievement, thinking about what is the mindset, skills, and wills necessary to be effective teachers. And so while we recruit Black and Brown teachers, we provide professional learning for everybody, because in Pennsylvania, and also as you heard in Wisconsin, the ratio, the balance is not there for as far as parity with Black students and Black teachers. And so what we recognize is that the teachers who are there, most of them are white women, that their mindset around Black children has to be developed, that they need very specific culturally responsive training that they may not necessarily get when they were in undergrad or graduate school, and now they're in a school with Black children. And when we've engaged with Black children, many of them said, I can't think about, we're recruiting them, like, hey, would you be interested in teaching? They said, I love kids, but I can't imagine coming back to a school because my experience in school has been so miserable. And so what are the ways that we can improve that outlook is for them to see themselves as part of the educational process. And so here's just a couple examples of what we use as in regard to our professional learning and addressing mindset issues. And again, this is for all educators. One, achievement. Often when people hear about achievement, they're thinking specifically about the children, but achievement also speaks to the adults who are leading classrooms and schools, their cultural competence, the critical consciousness. How are they, how do they view schools, the communities that send children, the history of public education, and how those histories and structures impact today's teaching and learning. This idea of servant leadership, cultural humility, how people show up. When we look at the data around new teachers, and where the majority of them say, I do not feel prepared to teach in urban settings or with students of color. That means that there has to be a level of humility to go and address these. And then this idea of healing. How can we all be part of restoration when a student has been harmed, when a student has gone, if the research says that Black students experience racial biases from their teachers as early as them being 3 and 4 years old, daycare and pre-K, then how is that compounded, and how as educators can we help heal them and help them with their own healing? And so these are some of the competencies. So we basically have 20 competencies altogether. These are just a couple of examples of how we provide professional learning. What are we doing for workshops and coaching and mentoring? So all our professional development is really grounded in these 10 plus 10 more, that speaks to what are the mindsets, how do people come across How do they show up? And how did your own cultural lens manifest itself in lesson plans? How does it manifest in disciplinary referrals? How does it manifest in how communities are built? And so we believe that with the right mindset, people can be far more effective and student outcomes can be accelerated at significant rates if we have a level of cultural awareness, which includes far more diversity than we have now in Pennsylvania and other states around the country.
Thanks, Sharif. That sounds really interesting. I love those 10 competencies that you talked about.
Thank you. Yeah, we worked with some of the competencies from New America, but then some of them, what we were doing with our teacher apprentices, you know, freshmen in high school and college students, where you know, they are paid to do this. You know, as a principal, I had students who were interested in becoming teachers, but they were catching you know, a bus to the suburbs to flip burgers. We're like, hey, how about we raise money to pay you to work on your craft? And likewise, we would have educators who said, hey, I've actually never been, the only time I'm around Black people is when I come to the school, right? And so imagine a white person, they say, I've never been around you know, Black people, but now I'm expected to teach them and I really don't know anything about them. And I've never had the conversation. I've been in schools where people don't want to have conversations about race, class, power, and privilege, and how that all shows up in classrooms and schools. And so that work is absolutely important. The mindset is a critical foundation, and then you develop the skill and the will. But it all starts with mindset and perspective.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And does your center partner with schools? Is that how the model works?
Yes, so we partner with schools as well as districts. We are working with a group of teacher colleges in Texas. We are working with the school district in Minneapolis, who we started conversing with after the George Floyd murder. And it's all grounded again in the competencies that you see. And you know, whether it's a district or a school or IHEs, we provide coaching, workshops, you know, and all of this obviously right now is virtual.
Yeah, of course. Well, thank you so much, Sharif.